Hello, it's Dr. Carhee here to answer a question. The question I'm here to answer is one that I get a lot when people ask me, Dr. Carhee, I have an injury. What should I use on my injury at home before I see you? Should I use ice or should I use heat? Interesting question. More often than not, if you have an injury that just occurred, it's a fresh injury. Just like if you happen to be injured while playing sports, the first thing they're going to ask you to do is to ice it, right? Everybody's heard of that saying called rest, ice, compression, and elevation. That's exactly the protocol you should use if you have a fresh injury. So the answer to this question is going to be to ice the area. Now, let me say that with the caveat. I prefer you use ice, natural ice out of the freezer. Simply, you can place it in a Ziploc bag, zip it up, and you put a covering over it. You can dampen the covering, a towel or whatever the case may be, and then apply that to the body area in question. This is so the ice will usually melt and not create a freezer burn. If you happen to be using a gel pack that's in the freezer, you have to be careful not to put that gel pack directly on your skin. This could result in some type of burn, freezer burn to the skin. So we want to be very careful. This is why I tell anybody here in my office that I'm being treated, who I'm treating, to please use natural ice, Ziploc bag. That's the best. But if all you have is gel packs, be certain you wrap it in a covering and don't place it directly on your skin. So the answer to the question, Dr. Carhee, what should I use, ice or heat? Generally speaking, right, rest, ice, compression, elevation is the proper protocol for a new injury, or we call it acute injury. Now, if this is talking about an old recurring injury or a spasm muscle, then come to me. We'll talk about heat later. All right, thank you. I'm Dr. Carhee, here to help you, okay? That's what I do. Been doing this for 17 years in the area, right? I live, work, and I play. 3910 Cascade Road, Southwest Atlanta, Midwest Cascade, City of South Fulton. Simply call us 404-699-0966 or see us on the web, paintowellness.com. Looking forward to help you and your family very soon.